gotten a little nicer, and I've been doing a lot of hiking and going to the beach and doing pretty well. Also, for the podcast, I uploaded, well, I recorded a new episode on direct democracy, which I was pretty happy with. It's about, I think it's almost an hour long, but I recorded it in my car and it didn't actually record. So I'm going to have to redo that. That's why there hasn't been an episode on that in a while, but there'll be another one coming. I will record that tomorrow and upload it then. So today I wanted to talk about something that's been happening recently with Joe Biden. Kind of the fascinating irony of the Democrats now taking the side of the accused and not believing women. So this was the great hue and cry against the Kavanaugh, that despite the lack of evidence, the mere accusation of impropriety against him after the fact was enough to convict him. And this is in line with, it seems to be, left-wing progressive democratic ideology. It goes way past just political attacks. I mean, this is something that they've implemented through Title IX, right? The Title IX changes to the regulations that the Obama administration, again, through non-legislative means, through basically regulatory fiat imposed, basically means that men are guilty of rape, not criminally in the court of law, but in terms of the administration of a school. So you won't go to jail, but you can be kicked out of school as a rapist or as a sex offender or as someone who's engaged in sexual misconduct, which is basically a blacklisting you from life, or for a large part of it. So we've had this now, these Tara Reade accusations against Joe Biden, which we don't know if they're true or not. It's always um, questionable when you have these people who are coming out much later. Now, there apparently were accusations much earlier. She talked to neighbors, her mom. Her mom famously called Larry King, which I'm sure most of you have heard. Uh, so I guess it's not fair to say that she waited until he was running for president, but that in and of itself doesn't make it true. She could have been lying to her mother. She could have been lying to her. Now we know Joe Biden's a weird, creepy guy who gets very handsy with young teenage girls on television. So uh, we don't know. But it's been interesting because most of the conservative commentators that I listen to, whether it's Clavin or Tucker or Ben Shapiro, have all taken the point that, well, hey, we don't know. Um, we don't want to, we're not saying Biden did it, but it's kind of interesting. They don't have to, their argument isn't going to stem on whether or not it's true that he did this. They're going to just be able to point out the hypocrisy and say, look, the burden of proof that they used against, well, any college guy, anyone who goes to a Title IX school, which is every school other than Hillsdale in Michigan, or Brett Kavanaugh, just applying that same standard to Biden makes him guilty. And now, my initial idea was that Democrats and the media would just continue to ignore the blatant contradiction there, the hypocrisy, and now it's become so overt that some of them are just admitting it, that they basically have a double standard and they're going to vote for Biden anyway. Well, good luck trying to, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg dies or retires in the next, who knows when, she's in the hospital again. I've heard that the likely replacement for her will be a woman. So that was very likely done for the purpose of avoiding what happened with Brett Kavanaugh. But the next time they nominate a man, good luck with the Democrats raising a hue and cry about that, and good luck to the many, many millions of Democrat supporters out there who are all incensed about Kavanaugh but don't give two shits about what's happening with Biden. So it's definitely, it's going to be, I think it's going to be a huge blow to Me Too. I don't know if it's necessarily going to end Me Too. Who knows? But I think one of Biden's only defenses is going to be that he's senile. He doesn't remember what happened, which could be honest. And he also probably did it. Um, he, it's possible he did this so much that he wouldn't remember. Like, I'm sure if you asked him about every 13-year-old girl that he touched on camera, he probably can't remember because, who can, man? It just happened so many times. So, yeah, I think that this is going to be a kind of like the end of Me Too, or very likely the end of Me Too. Or it will end Biden. I think there's a possibility. I mean, we know that Hillary Clinton wants to run. We know that there are a lot of progressives who hate Biden. Those who don't like Biden or think he's a weak candidate or want to run themselves could see this as a way to oust him from the candidacy. I don't know exactly how, and if that were to happen, what would be, I mean, they would have to go to the convention. They'd have to have a brokered convention, which I thought was impossible now given the delegate count. So maybe if they could get him to resign, in which case we don't know who he would pick. So this is a huge, it's a huge problem. It's too hard for them to ignore at this point. They tried. If you looked at the media coverage, there was basically none for a long time. The New York Times had that hilarious tweet where they said that there's no evidence, like Joe Biden doesn't have any history of this other than inappropriately touching women on camera. You know, if that's what he does on camera, what does he do in the background? Like, is he on his worst behavior when he's on national television and he's an utter gentleman behind closed door? I mean, come on. So, all right, I actually didn't have a ton to say there, so I'll go ahead and start answering these questions. But Amash said Biden is better than Trump. Well, they're both bad, so you could make that argument. I tend to disagree though with Justin there. Uh, hey Luke, you voted for Biden. How did you already vote? He is hilarious. I can't even handle it. Yeah, he's definitely senile. Like it's interesting to see that he can't be on camera for more than 7 or 8 minutes. They have to record everything. He's appearing with his wife more and more, so she can kind of carry some of the load, answer some of the questions. You know, when there's an awkward silence or awkward pause, she can jump in. So it kind of reminds me a little bit of FDR. Now, FDR was cognizant he could talk, but he couldn't walk. And so he would appear with his sons or a governor or whoever else whenever he was in a newsreel. They would prop him up on these leg braces, and then he would stand with an arm on either one and then kind of do this thing where he would rock back and forth. You can kind of see he's on a pendulum where he's trying to look like he's moving. Now, in real life, you would have seen what was going on, but since very, very few people ever saw him in real life, they would just see newsreel footage of him. And that, if you weren't aware to look for it, you wouldn't know. So he's physically relying on other people around him. The media, by the way, knew that about him and never reported it. They covered his ass completely on that topic, which was a huge travesty, to be honest. So Biden, he can probably still physically walk and everything, but he's not all there mentally. In fact, it seems like he's declining quickly, and which would make sense from the stress of the campaign. So apparently he's now going to only do joint things. I think the left is staying consistent in that the ends justify the means explains a lot of what an outsider would consider hypocritical actions. Yeah, but unfortunately they don't make that explicit, right? So when they were arguing against Kavanaugh, they weren't saying, listen, he's a Republican and we're a Democrat and this is power politics, and so we're just going to try and oust him any way we can by making false accusations. The argument was the accusations should be seen as true. And there was this whole rhetoric developed around why that type of testimony should be considered valid. Not, well, this is power politics and we're just going to say and do whatever we can. So I saw Andrew Klavan say that the left doesn't have any standards that aren't double standards, and that's basically true, confirmed by this. Can you comment on the dysfunctional modern dating market? My experience dealing with women as a young straight guy has been very hard and unpleasant. Well, Jolly Crocodile, I'm sorry to hear that. Obviously, I'm not the best person to ask. My anecdotal experience with young women is negligible, basically zero, and never in the dating context. So I have seen and heard about the stats where, something like, I'm going to misremember this, but on Tinder, it's like the top 15% of guys, so the most physically fit guys, slightly older, more successful, more highly educated guys, the top 15% basically get all the attention, and the bottom 85% of guys are competing for like the bottom 10 or 15% of girls. So it's like a complete inversion of the value. And so if you can't hack it in that top percent, you're basically in this really competitive free for all for the bottom ladies physically anyway. So uh, I don't know what to tell you. There's ways to up your game, both physically and in terms of your social skills, and that might just be the only thing you can do. The other thing to do is to get out of the house. Don't be a gamer. Don't be on the TV. Don't be on Netflix. Go out, take a page out of Robert Putnam and be in the world and join a club, join a park, do whatever it is. Do something where there are women and whatever. Go to bars, whatever it takes. Just don't drink too much and try. The one thing I will say is that the whole idea that you retire or you retreat, I don't think is a good plan, because if you have a desire for a relationship, if you want a girlfriend, if you want a wife, if you want kids, those desires aren't going to go away. And so just saying, well, I'm going to retreat into my man cave, which again, you have a right to do. And there's actually, I'm sure there are people who actually would just prefer that anyway. But if you do have a desire, you cannot just retreat and just think that it's going to go away, because your desires are not going to go away. But as in terms of like specific things to do, like you really are asking the wrong guy. And I'm kind of curious by this, because one of the things that people ask me about the most is like men going your own way and all that kind of stuff. And one of the very few like quote unquote interviews I ever did was about that. And I don't know, I'm really not sure why people want my take. To be gay is to really um, kind of skip all that. That's just this thing that's a social reality for straight guys, that as a gay guy, we have our own problems, that are different. And in some ways, being gay is much easier, and in some ways, it's much harder. So, and actually, there's almost an inversion of the time preference. Hans Hermann Hoppe famously said gays have high time preference. It's more the problems in the gay world are like long-term problems, but short-term it's pretty easy. Whereas with um, straight people, I feel like the short term is harder. It's harder to meet a girl. It's harder to get a date. When you're gay, you can meet a guy every day if you want, especially if you don't have really high standards, or if you're decent looking. You don't have to be in the top 10%. You can be in the top 50% and still be meeting every day. If you have no standards, you can be in the bottom 50%. You can be very low and still meet people every day. On the other hand, finding a long-term relationship, something that's very lasting, that's going to be really rewarding, is actually very hard. And so, whereas with straight people, I feel like, yes, going on a date, going on a hookup, having sex, having lots of partners, that's hard. But if you do find somebody, it's not uncommon for like straight people who they meet a girl and like they end up. I mean, I know people who didn't date anyone, and then they maybe dated one or two people, and boom, they're getting married. So like, and sometimes that works for a long term. So I think that there's different problems, but I don't have an answer for like what to do. I don't know why people keep asking me. People are free to do it, but like, I mean, you're asking advice from someone who has really no anecdotal experience. And my interest in it, I don't really have any like personal stake in it. So uh holy cow. I wouldn't be surprised if they try the same thing with the male accuser next. That'll be entertaining at least. Yeah, I mean that's the play, right? They're going to say that, and so we're going to find out that she inappropriately. But the whole rhetoric is that men are always wrong, women are always right. So I don't know how they're going to square that circle for her. For the Ginsburg replacement. Yeah, I'm sure Ginsburg is hoping that a Democrat gets elected and then she can retire like the next day. But she may not be able to make it that long. Uh, that would be interesting if we have a process of doing that before the election. Obviously, that happened with Obama, and the Senate just waited until the election was over, so Trump could. And because the Republicans control the Senate, so I don't think that would work this time. Me Too never had any legitimacy. Anyway, Clinton is still mostly a hero to the progressives. Yeah, that's basically fair. And it's amazing. I mean, I don't know. I've never talked to anybody who really denies that he's guilty of a whole lot there. I mean, when it comes to the sex crimes, now people are basically think all the non-sex crimes are conspiracy theories, even though there's a whole lot of evidence for impropriety that goes way past what he did with his dick. And they tend to dismiss that all as conspiracy theories because CNN did not tell them otherwise. But Yeah, they just are like, well, he's still a great guy or whatever. It's none of our business. So yeah, they definitely have double standards when it comes to that. Um, Elections are getting closer and closer. Hey, Desert Lynx, I know who you are. I know who you are, Desert Lynx. We've met before. Um, I'm doubting Me Too is over for good. I just wanted just until it's convenient again, just like the anti-war movement. Yeah, and that's a good point. How that was the anti-war movement was overwhelmingly partisan. Obviously, there are some leftists who are still anti-war, the Glenn Greenwalds of the world, Max Blumenthal, Jimmy Dore. They're still out there, but they're not the movers and shakers of the movement. They're highly marginalized. And there are, real feminists. There are real Me Too women who are going to take this seriously, but they're not the ones who are amplified. They're not the ones in the mainstream media. They're not the most powerful ones. They're going to also be marginalized. Uh, so, but Desert Lynx, yeah, I know who you are, Desert Lynx. We need to have a jiu-jitsu match when all this is over. Uh, I would actually be surprised if the DNC replaces Biden. Yeah, that would be an unprecedented step. Black turnout for Biden is incredibly high. Biden does fine in the suburbs. Now the GOP is losing suburbs. This is important. Yeah, and also just would be a huge. Who do they replace him with, and whoever they do will be marred by they didn't win in their primary. I mean, and there's going to be the big problem of what do you tell all the progressive Bernie Sanders supporters? Bernie Sanders lost fair and square. They're always gunning against him, but it wasn't as obvious this time as it was with Clinton. But he's going to say, look, I have the second most delegates. I actually ran. Why not me? Now, but apparently, if you ask people like Jimmy Dore or even people like Dave Smith, it doesn't seem like Sanders really wants to be president, that his motivation seems very weak. He doesn't seem really willing to go for it. So he probably won't do that, but his supporters are going to walk just like they did last time. Biden seems like he would be ineffective, maybe, so better than Trump. Uh, I don't think so because I'm pretty sure Biden, as just an establishment Democrat, you may be very right that he's senile and all that, but the establishment will just rule through him, which has been one of the. I mean, I think they've been selling him in that way. Look, he's just going to be a figurehead. It wasn't the Atlantic published an article that he needs to survive. We just need to use his corporeal body. They actually use those terms. So I think that the DNC establishment will continue to run the government through him. Uh, Controlled Biden lost 2020, progressive in 2024. I think that is the smartest play for them. Also, Trump is great for their fundraising, fire up the base, etc., etc. Yeah, it's going to be interesting what the DNC does in the post-Trump era. Are they going to continue treating every Republican as literally Hitler? I think there's just something about Trump that aggravates a lot of people, including a lot of progressives, that other candidates are not going to do. There isn't going to be another Trump-like candidate, I don't think. He's whatever you want to say about him, he's pretty unique. Um, Voting for Biden, I live in Virginia, open primary, I despise Brady. Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. I also happen to be the chair for ANCAPs for Biden. There you go. Uh, Biden's campaign slogan should be "You can't fight City Hall." I think his is just remember Obama. Remember Obama. Don't remember the Iraq War. Don't remember segregation. Don't remember the crime bill. Don't remember basically every legislative thing that he's done. Just hey, I was up there with Obama. We were pals. I hope with how attention is on Waco again, Biden's behavior during those proceedings gets more attention. I don't care as much about him grabbing women. He's a demonic status. I don't remember the big standout and villain in those hearings, from my perspective, was Chuck Schumer. He was absolutely horrific. And then the only guy who was reasonable was Bob Barr, the libertarian candidate for president in 2008, I want to say, after. And I mean, Schumer basically said he starts the proceedings. Law enforcement did nothing wrong, and they can't be convicted of anything, and the Davidians are at fault. So what's the point of having an investigation if that is the pretext of it? So who do you think they will get to replace Biden? Well, I think there is good evidence that Hillary wants it. I mean, we just know she's ambitious as sin, and she's updated like her website to show her political positions, and people are starting to suggest it. And whenever they're getting suggestions, you wonder if that's a sincere suggestion or if that is something that she's planted, because that is a lot of how they work. There's a system of, in this situation, she would want others to go, hey, we need you to help us, and she's getting drafted to do it. This is, by the way, how FDR got his third and fourth term. He could not, even with all the power that he had, just come out and say, I want a third term because I'm FDR. He had to pretend like he was reluctant, and so there was this, he launched a covert campaign to be, we need him, he's helping us, we can't change ships. The war started in Europe by then, in 1940, so it had already been going on for a couple months. And, he kept us out of the war. It's the same thing with Wilson. So I see Hillary probably trying to, but other than her, I don't know, because they're definitely not going to give it to Biden, who is the guy who has the most legitimate claim to doing it, or sorry, to Biden, to Sanders. So they're not going to give it to Sanders. And when they don't give it to him, what happens to his endorsement and to Tulsi's, are they, because they endorsed Biden, they didn't endorse Kamala Harris or Hillary Clinton or whoever it is they used to replace. So uh, I don't know. Like, they're probably going to just keep running with Biden, and there might be an understanding that his VP is really going to be running the show. But hell, I was even hearing people saying that Obama should be his VP, because the Constitution says you can't have 3 terms, but it doesn't say you can't be a VP. So, have you ever voted in a presidential election? If yes, then who vote for? Only once, in 2004, for Michael Badnarik. Uh, I wasn't asking for advice. I was just interested in your observation. I'd imagine you would have a bird's eye view of a lot of straight people problems. Um, yeah, there's there's a lot of problems. Like, the whole feminist movement is really encouraging women to not to kind of have a life independent of a man, and to do their own thing, and to have a career. And many of them do want children, and I think there's a lot who do focus on their career, and a little bit later in their 30s or 40s are like, oh man, I really do want a family. And at that point, it's not impossible, but it's a lot harder. And I mean, it's harder for women in this respect. They really don't have as much time. Men, hypothetically, I mean, some men can father children in their 80s and 90s, but like, you could have a healthy family relationship and still have like a 25, 30-year window of being a dad. Whereas with a woman, it really is, you should be having babies in your 20s and your late teens, and then it gets much harder in your 30s. It's still possible for most women, but it gets much harder. And then when you talk about your 40s, again, it's possible, but it becomes very, very hard. So their window is much shorter, but they're being encouraged to spend all this time in school and to not be interested in families so much. And so many of them aren't. And there's other things too, the legal ramifications of marriage and the no fault divorce, the fact that for most men, the women will have them by the balls, essentially, financially and in terms of custody if they do have kids. That it's a lot of guys are reluctant to do it as well. So, and the other thing is just the sexual promiscuity. Look, I'm guilty here. I'm more guilty of this than most straight people are ever going to be. But um, if you can have the sex without the commitment, then why not? And it really will change people's attitudes quite a bit. And I'm certainly not calling for laws against fornication. I certainly wouldn't agree with that. But the degree of celebration and the degree of social acceptance of it has a cost, and that's one of the costs. So, uh, yeah, I think that, uh, and it's interesting. The effect of government policy is definitely to break up families. Very interesting question of if that is the goal or not. You can see that the diminution of a family Just like the destruction of a church is kind of de facto help a state, because then allegiance will be deferred to that, authority will be deferred to that. Uh, on the other hand, though, I don't know that, like, you're never going to find like a secret plan that's where this is laid out. A lot of it is, I think, actually more to do with the bureaucracy. You have a lot of social workers and activist lawyers and activist prosecutors who are feminists and who are women and who get in there because they know that they can exercise power, not necessarily shape explicit policy, but how they can implement policy that way, and they do. And so a lot of CPS workers, just like a lot of public school teachers, they see this as their lever on society, and it's not an average person that goes there, right? It's not the people who become CPS workers are not a random subset of the population. They're people who have motivations for doing it, and those are progressive motivations primarily. Uh, Remember the Bookmobile, the Bookmobile? No. Ever thought about putting some of your books in a mobile and lending those books out? I've kind of toyed with the idea a little bit, but I couldn't think of a practical way to do it. So no, I haven't. I was slightly enraged hearing Dr. Paul talk about that Texas judge putting that single mom in jail for disobeying no working orders. His judgment remarks were sickening. I didn't hear those remarks, so I can't speak to them. What did Dr. Paul say about the Texas judge putting that single mother in jail for disobeying no working orders? I heard about that case. I did not hear what Paul said about it. I think if Clarence Thomas had been hospitalized, he would receive less sympathy. Yeah, there's kind of been this interesting cult of Ruth Bader Ginsburg that's just erupted after the last thing. I think whether it was something like Google references to her health like shot up 1,000,000%, and you see all these little documentaries about how she's a feisty, and they show her like working out, and I just feel like there's an understanding that so much is decided by the court, and that it's so clearly a political agency, right? They're political appointees, and they're there to enact policy, and there's nothing about it. Like, they're not going, who's the best jurist, who's the greatest scholar of the Constitution, who's the best law professor. They're never going to nominate somebody like Richard Posner or Cooley or any of these people who have esteem far above other judges. They're going after political appointees, and so there's this realization that she's kind of going to be this. If she gets replaced by a Trump appointee, then that's going to really tip this court for a long time. And so all of a sudden, her persona becomes really important. And it's just kind of weird. All these people that don't know any decisions she's made, they're not familiar with her in any kind of sense of jurisprudence. They just know she's on there to basically keep Roe v. Wade legal, would be the main thing. And so they idolize her, and it's really kind of weird. How much do you think the Me Too movement contributed to Cosby and Weinstein being convicted? More to Weinstein, less to Cosby. I think Cosby was a straight up. Well, they all came out. The main thing was that all the people came out. That was what really killed them. So yeah, probably a lot. It's probably fair that it'd say it was pretty important to those. But at the very least, they got their days in court, which is less than you can say for all these people prosecuted under Title IX or kicked out of their schools for Title IX. I saw an image, don't know if it's a meme, but it showed a sharp partisan divide over whether you think it's safe to do certain things. Republicans far more willing to get out. Imagine that. We've gotten to the point where there's a partisan divide on what people think about health. Yeah. It was interesting, and I was going to make a video on this, and I didn't, but maybe I will. But there's a lot of people, like I was talking to a guy in Grinder, as is my wont, and he really wanted to meet, and I really wanted to meet him. And I'm in New Hampshire, he's in Massachusetts, and in our discussion, it became clear that he does not think COVID-19 is a serious threat. He thinks he's seen that it might be more contagious, but it seems to be less lethal than originally feared. That it's not a high risk for either me or him. We both think that we may have already had it, which seems plausible at this point. I had a period where I had a very, very mild cough for about a week. It was so mild that I would hesitate, and maybe I didn't have it. I don't know. I told him that, and he said he had a similar event around a similar time. So I was like, well, hey, if we think that it's not that serious and we're basically social isolated, so we're not putting other people at risk, neither one of us works at a nursing home or anything like that, maybe we should meet up. And he was like, no. And ultimately, it became down to, I'm not going to do it because the governor of Massachusetts says that you shouldn't do it. And I'm like, but you've looked at the data yourself and you've concluded that it's not dangerous. And so it was kind of this instance where he knows better, but he's being told what to think, and so he's just going to obey. And that attitude is revolting to me, and it's also crazy because I even pointed out they've changed their minds repeatedly about what to do, what to cause. Do wear a mask, don't wear a mask. The WHO is telling us that it can't be transmitted to humans, and then that it can. Who's going to get it? Blah blah blah. They don't know, and yet you're still going to say you're going to defer to their authority, to a politician's authority, by the way, right? The experts, the medical experts who are in government, the medical bureaucrats in the CDC or whatever, they work for the politicians, and their careers depend on the good graces of those politicians. And so what they say, even if they are experts, can't be trusted. And for you to just trust that what the government's telling you, or to feel obligated even, I think there are some people who even realize they could be wrong, and they're just going to say, well, I feel like it's my civic duty to obey. And that is fucking asinine and terribly stupid, because they're not omniscient and they get shit wrong all the time. So, uh, hey, Desert Lynx. I watched your video on time preference from about 7 years ago. Seeing you do so many videos, I don't know if I remembered it, but have your thoughts changed since that video uh, on anything in there? I don't remember that video, so I cannot say. So, I think the title of the video might have been "High Time Preference for Hoppa," and it was just basically just saying that I was a fan of Hoppa, even though I'm gay, and he apparently is not a fan of gays. But more than that, I don't remember too much. That was, after all, 7 years ago. Do you think the Democrats will become more pro-war than the Republicans in the next decade? People around Biden, I assume, will be quite hawkish, like the guys around Obama. Yeah, it does seem that. Well, historically they have been, right? Historically, the Democrats have been the hawks, and the conservatives have been the humble foreign policy people. I've also heard that Trump is apparently trying to use COVID as a reason to leave Afghanistan, and everyone on his staff is saying no, and everyone in the military is saying no. Um, the bureaucracy of the Pentagon wants to be in war. They want to be occupying all these areas for a host of reasons that are either very dubious geopolitical or very clearly bureaucratic incentives. Right? They just want to be deployed because it means money for them, it means power for them, it means careers for them, which is nothing new. The Pentagon has been like this since at least World War II, if not before. Uh, and the Democrats want to look tough, and it's a big program, it's a big money program, and they want to use the state to make the world in their preferred image anyway, and the military is, one of the most powerful tools for that, so they're not going to get rid of it. Uh, Working on my mounted gogoplata. You'll have to show it to me. Which do you think is more likely to get, Biden Klobuchar or Biden Harris? Yeah, I don't know. I really, really don't know. It would have to be, in terms of like votes, it would have to be Harris, but they're both so awful. I don't even want to think about it. Did you read the U.S. Today piece that asserts that Biden's accusers likely liked Twitter posts by Biden in 2017 and 2018 that criticized sexual assault? Didn't see it. That's kind of funny. Trump was against the Iraq War. Biden for. Perhaps that's significant. Or Trump has a pass because he was a game show host then and not in government. Trump, I don't remember if he was against it at the time. He was against it when Obama was president. So I'm not sure. It's hard because, like you point out there, he wasn't in government. So his opinions don't really carry the weight of having had to vote. Obama got away with this too. Like, Obama didn't vote for the Iraq War because he wasn't in the Senate at the time. Not so for Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton or many of the other ones. So um, there's no evidence that Biden is in any way less of a hawk than anybody, right? He falls into that mainstream, John McCain, Lindsey Graham, Hillary Clinton Joel Lieberman, right? They really agree on almost everything, and they're just awful when it comes to foreign policy. Um, Biden and Klobuchar would definitely be the most formidable. Is Klobuchar from? Where's she from? Is she from Ohio? Thank you for doing all these live streams. They're fantastic. Well, thank you, Luke. Thank you for watching and commenting. I always appreciate it, and for not circumcising your upcoming son. Do you have a take on the COVID-19 protests? As with every issue, it seems like discourse is being pushed into binary. You are either COVID-19 is bad or containment, or COVID-19 is just the flu, bro, and end containment. There's no room for nuance. My opinion is COVID-19 is bad, but we do need to stop the government from taking advantage of this crisis. So, obviously, being from Michigan, and some of the most well-publicized protests have come in Michigan, from Michigan, and I like among my social media, again, the biggest group of my family and friends that I grew up with are from Michigan, and it's interesting because my family is split on this. I have cousins and I have cousins, aunts, and uncles who are 100% for the protesters, and I have other ones who are 100% against, and I've got to watch them argue about this. My brother and I are with the protesters to a large extent. My parents are not. And I would say that what you sum up there is basically true. I think that we don't know, we're not going to know the true extent of COVID-19 until at least a year or two from now. And we're getting conflicting reports on how bad it is. It seems like it's possible they are overcounting in the sense that they are attributing everyone dying from COVID-19 when indeed some of those people are likely have comorbidity issues. They might be dying of cancer, they might be dying of the flu, and they're just getting listed to COVID. On the other hand, it might be much more widespread than we think, and so people could be dying that we don't know about. So we're going to have to look at total demographic studies in a year or two. Now, I think my take is that when this was first getting big in January, and the first numbers we were seeing from China, which admittedly we can assume were fake to a large extent, was that this was highly contagious and that around 3% of people who caught it would die, and something like 20% of people who caught it would need to be not only hospitalized but in an ICU. If that was true, we could have seen 10 million people die in the United States this year, and maybe even more, because all the ICUs would fill up, and then anyone else who needed one for any other reason would also die. And I looked at all the things of the bell curve, and how many beds that we have. The United States has under 1 million, something like 950,000, 980,000 ICU beds, and we could have had a scenario where 10 million people needed to be on ICUs at a given moment for several months. That has not happened. Okay, now they implemented so with that potentially happening, a strong reaction was warranted. Now, I would have preferred it was private, and I think many private people did. Without getting into what the government can or cannot do, it would make sense. One can understand that they would say, hey, let's shut things down. This could be that bad. We're bracing for something that could be that cataclysmic. That would make sense. Now that we're halfway through, I think it's safe to say that those 3% numbers that was wrong. It was much more, it appears that it was much more contagious, but much less lethal. I'm thinking right now it's looking more like it's a 0.5%, and most of the people who are dying are people who had comorbidities. They have other problems. They had pre-existing conditions. That's not to minimize that. That's still significant. So it is a problem. But yes, we cannot be in a position where we just go and say, okay, government, you have carte blanche. You can just say that you're protecting people and then do whatever you want. There needs to be resistance to that. Otherwise, there is nothing that they will not do then. And it's been interesting because like left-wingers will look at these protests and be like, these people are just mean. We're just trying to protect people. We don't want people to get sick. And so these measures are there for them to protect them. Of course, these governors are oftentimes doing shit that has nothing to do with COVID-19. The governor of Michigan, Governor Whitmer, the one with all these protests, she was doing stuff like saying we need to pay for the college of, all healthcare workers and all essential workers. What does that have to do with battling COVID-19? Nothing. That's just a policy. We need Medicaid for all. What does that have to do with bailing out the Kennedy Center of the Performing Arts? What does that have to do? they're just getting away with everything that they possibly can. And just imagine if you're a left-wing person, if it's November and Trump goes, yes, democracy is important, but we don't want people to die of COVID, so we can't have an election because too many people will get sick. And I just want to protect people, so there's no election, and I'm just going to stay president. How about that? Do you think that left-wing people are going to say, oh, yeah, that's true? Or do you think they're going to go out in the streets and protest? Or do you think if they try and they're told, no, you can't protest, you have to do social distancing? No, they're not. They're not going to give a shit about that. They're going to go and protest, and they fucking should. And they should support the people who are doing it now. So no, I support it. There needs to be pushback. That's not to minimize that it's not serious. It's not to say that there isn't anything to it. It's not to say that it's fake. But government overreach isn't fake either. And government overreach can kill people too. And government overreach can ruin people's lives. And we could be looking at some serious problems in the means of production and in the in our food supply because of the disruption to the to capitalism and to the division of labor because of this. And these are legitimate questions that need to be answered. And politicians can't just say, I'm trying to protect people so I can do whatever I want. It's for the children. Okay, what the fuck? Everything's for the children. You just premise anything you want to do. You can do anything and just premise it with, I want to protect the children. No, it's not that simple. You should get pushback. Now, are these protests doing a lot? I don't know, but they need to. I support them happening. They should be happening. I support them with guns, for Christ's sake. And I defy, if you're a left-wing person and you don't like it, what are you going to do when the president says the election's canceled? Or maybe he says, I'm declaring in every Democratic city. So yes, you can have the election, but the people in Detroit, Chicago, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, New York, they can't vote because it's too dangerous there. So just the red areas of their states can vote. What do you think? Are you going to just sit back and take that, or are you going to go protest? You're going to go protest, and rightly so. It has been sad. I mean, seeing my family argue about it, but they are. It's pretty much split down the middle from the people who opposed. How old are you? Just asking you because I want to know how old you were when Waco happened. I guess the question is how old were you then? I'm 37. I was 10 when Waco happened, or I turned I turned 10. My birthday's in March, and Waco happened in February. So, well, it started in February, and I turned 10 during the siege. How about that? Um, yeah, Trump wasn't against the Iraq War until a week after it started. I think that might be true. Duh, duh, duh. In the Madness of Crowds, Murray discusses uh, people becoming gay late in life being a revealing of true identity, but becoming straight is seen as betrayal. Have you heard of people becoming straight in real life? Uh, I've not heard of that happening in real life. There are people who claim that and who uh, trumpet that a lot, and there's always suspicion that it's being disingenuous. I have the one example. I did read an article once by a guy who did seem to be sincere about it. But you never know what's going on in people's heads. It seems like for many people who do that are virtue signaling. They're evangelicals very often, and they say that they want to assent to the power of God, and they want to say they prayed the gay away. Um, and I wouldn't say that's necessarily impossible, but I think that's highly, highly unlikely. Now, certainly, you can decide to not engage in homosexual acts, and you can decide to, act straight and to date women and to have sex with women. That's possible. Look at Mormons do it all the time. The Mormon view on that is kind of interesting because you're allowed to be gay in how you think as long as you act a certain way, then that's what counts. And there's even they call it same sex attraction. There used to be a show on TLC called My Husband's Not Gay about these married Mormon couples where the husband was clearly gay and would even they'd be walking their kids out and the dad would see like a basketball court and be like, hey, sexy. And actually, believe it or not, I had a subscriber years ago. I don't think he still watches, but he messaged me and he was, oh my, he was Croatian, gay, anarcho-capitalist, Mormon, and he was married with 4 kids. And he said he'd always been gay. Then he converted to Mormonism, and so he decided to get married. And his wife knew that he was gay. She understood it, and but he thought it was his religious duty to get married and have kids, so he did. And all the talk that we did, I mean, he would compliment me and say I was very handsome, but he would not talk dirty, and he would not get into all that, explicit stuff. So that raises the question: what does it matter what's deep down in his head if he's married and having kids and only acting that way? Uh, is he still gay in any sense? So people can definitely change how they behave. I don't think that you can change, though, or I think it's very, very hard. I don't think it's something you can volitionally do. I don't think you can decide not to be attracted to something. Now, what you're attracted to might change. That's not something I think you can control, though. But you can control your actions, and you can live straight if you want. Um, but Murray's point there is a valid one, the idea that you're only given credit if you self-actualize in a certain way. So if you self-actualize, say, oh, I'm a trans person, then you get celebrated. But if you're trans and then you say, you know what, this was a mistake and I don't believe in this anymore, then you don't get celebrated. And if you come out as gay, you're a hero. But if you come out as straight, I mean, obviously you don't get a hero. And if you don't if you become straight again, you're a traitor. And a lot of politically active gays consider anyone who deviates from basically progressive orthodoxy as a traitor. But they have this way, they have all this identity politics. This is not just true for gays, it's true for blacks, for Latinos. They have this problem that whatever subgroup you're talking about, they're members of that subgroup who are libertarians or who are conservative or who are not liberals. And so they just have this thing where they just call them like Uncle Toms. They just dismiss them and invalidate their existence with smears, and they do that all the time. I mean, they've been doing that forever. I don't know if the feminist movement is doing that. I think we live in an environment where there's other activities to do now besides raise families, and adoption, of course, is always an option. Yeah, and that's true, but I think most people want biological kids. It's true, there's a lot to do, and like society is kind of atomizing a lot and making it harder to have relationships like that, and things like Tinder and Instagram and all this stuff. They're making normal bodies uncompetitive, if that makes any sense, right? Everyone's seeing the top 1/10 of 1% of the physiques out there, and getting their shits and giggles from that, from the porn, from the Instagrams, from the TikToks or whatever it is. And so when you go on a date with a guy who's average, is that going to do it for most girls, Have you heard of Goy, spelled G0O, G0Y, and if so, what are your views? I have not heard of Goy. I mean, I've heard of the word Goy from Yiddish, but that doesn't sound like that's that, so I don't know. During the fall of 2002, Howard Stern asked Trump if he supported invading Iraq, to which Trump said, yeah, I guess so. It doesn't sound like a very, strong endorsement, but oh man, I'm so far behind. Oh my gosh. Holy shit, guys. I cannot talk as long as I've been doing. Holy cow. I'm like so far behind. Uh, there's no way the courts don't know where they are doing when they brutalize men in court. I don't know. They could justify in their minds, right? That they're just helping the women. The state actually makes it difficult to adopt. That's true. Uh, Cosby trial was fixed. So I've heard that alleged, but I don't know if that's true. Um, so stuff about that. So I'm gonna skip Penizoid. I don't know enough about the Cosby case to comment really. Um, Corona is such a nothing burger. Yeah, but the actions and the reaction, the stuff that they've done to fuck up the economy is not nothing. Um, Similar thing with me. The girl I've been talking to totally buys into the COVID BS. We're both under 25-year-olds. For fuck's sake, we're not going to get COVID and die if we hang out and mess around. Nope, probably not. I mean, it's probably 0.5%, and that 0.5% includes the 80-year-olds and 90-year-olds and people with cancer. I think it would be weird flip where today you're literally killing people and the next day you're fine and go out, whereas they will never be a distinct difference except government decrees. Yeah, it's just weird. Like, oh, it was safe and now it's not safe because the governor said so. Come on. Um, Hop is homophobe. Wow, who knew? Just dropping by and saying I like the OKC video. Well, thanks. Glad you did. Read the books about it. Klobuchar's from Minnesota. Well, the Democrats are going to get Minnesota anyway, so it doesn't matter. They probably won't pick her then. Um, oh yeah, I just had a son and I made sure he's intact, but no big thing because my wife agreed, of course. Well, Charles Gillum, congratulations on the son and congratulations on bringing about an intact America. Um, they're adding a racial narrative to the oh yeah, I've heard that too. That it's yeah, I see a lot of this. Oh, if the black people did this, they'd be killed. Well, that doesn't say anything about whether the COVID-19 protests are valid or not. That doesn't mean like actually seen this a lot where people are like this proves white privilege. What the fuck? What does this have to do with white privilege? It's just like a way to derail any discussion, right? We could start having a debate about abortion, and you could just say, yeah, what about white privilege? Right? Like this is I think this is like a new tactic that anytime you have a policy discussion on a topic that the left doesn't have a really good position on or doesn't have a strong argument, they're just going to say, yeah, but what white privilege, you know, means that we have to divert the argument to a discussion of that. And again, what does that have to do with COVID-19? What does that have to do with open carry? What does that have to do with the right to protest the government? I mean, I have a lot of people saying, look, when the Black Panthers did this, they banned open carry. I'm like, so are you saying you support banning open carry? Like you don't want white people to have guns, so you ban it, and you don't want black people to have guns, so you ban that too. Yeah, but yeah, I've noticed that as well, and it's very disturbing. Uh, yeah, it's the only card they have to play. Do you think you are a lockdown mandate protester? Do you think you are a lockdown mandate protester is a protester if they just break the law and are not going to protest? You just consciously break the law. I don't know. Do not circumcise. Paperwork has been filed. Congratulations, Luke. Pay very close attention. Don't let them get away. Sometimes they do it automatically or they try and sneak it in. So I would make that. I assume most doctors won't do that, but you do not know, and I would be very careful. Like, make sure that you are very clear about that. And if it does, sue the fuck out of them. Um, it doesn't really matter who is selected as president. All modern presidents must have be in allegiance with Zionists, whether ideological or compromised. Um, I think you're giving this. Look, I don't. I know all about AIPAC and the Zionist control of the Israel lobby, and their power really can't be underestimated. But it can't. I say that, but like they are a satellite state. They don't have that much power. So I think it is possible. And you did see things like Obama letting the vote go through when he got pissed off at Bibi. So, and by the way, one of the very very few things Obama did that was okay. Uh, I was able to convince my best buddy not to circumcise his son. He's come to himself and used to be pro-circ before I got to him. I feel very accomplished by. So, Irene, if you're still watching, would you go ahead and point out? Can you say what arguments you thought were effective with him that really worked? Because that's what I would like to know. That's what people would want to know. What things work and what things don't. Um, I consider myself a lockdown mandate protester. I protest by breaking the law and buying non-essential goods. We need some arrest TikTok nurses protesters. A well-reasoned, reasonable analysis of the plague situation. I'm impressed. Most people are very binary in their thinking. Well, thanks if you're talking to me. Um, I'm thinking about growing back mine, but still not sure even after watching all your videos. Doesn't really matter to me because my wife still will sit on it either way. Yeah, but Charles, it may feel better when you're restored. The guy who invented the TLC Tugger is straight and married, and he started having sensitivity problems, and so he restored, and it definitely helped. And I do think it definitely will increase sensitivity and function. It is more fun when you have the skin there. So there are benefits to it that are definitely worth considering. It takes a long time, but it's also very cheap. You can do it for free, or you can spend a couple, maybe $100, maybe $200, and that's basically it. So, um, consider that. You probably can have better sex than you realize. Would be my thing. If you say I feel fine, fair enough. You could probably feel more fine. Peter Hitchens commentary. So that's the other Hitchens brother, right? I've never watched him. What do you think would happen if Trump identified as a woman? I think he would be scorned harshly instead of praised. But yeah, I agree that he would be scorned, even though by their own logic that should be taken seriously and they should just believe him and they would just not give a shit. They would completely invert their principles. Again, they don't have as Andrew Clavin says, the left doesn't have the only standards the left has is double standards. Liberals are totally blind to the potential of Trump using the corona's second wave to suspend the election. It's going to be a law fest come November. Yeah, I think that they are too. I think that, I mean, he's going to be able to use it to his advantage, I think, and they're fools for not seeing that. And they should be on the side of the protesters so they won't be hypocrites again when they protest. Currently 20% unemployment. Each additional 1% equals 40K preventable deaths from suicide, deferred healthcare, substance abuse. That's 800K a year. Is it worth it? Yeah. Legitimate question that you're not supposed to ask. It's for the children. Ironically enough, children are almost completely impervious to dying of COVID. Yeah, that's also fair. Um, wouldn't be surprised if we lost half of all meat by the end of August. Well, I hope you all buy a cow because that's what I did. Um, Left seems to be completely ignorant that we will literally have to work, have an economy to survive, quite far from Trotsky's "he who does not work, neither shall he eat." New left is spoiled. Yeah, I do think a lot of them just imagine that if the government gives them a check, they'll be fine. They really, and this is a cliche, but their ignorance of economics is really is that deep. The champagne socialists are rich kids who just think everything is always there and that there's always more money and that all they just need more, their allowance account filled, and yeah, they just don't have any clue about any of that. They don't want it. It's just they live in a world of platitudes and imaginary scarcity. It's yeah. Factor in the UN estimates multiple 100,000 kids starving in the third world. 37 is the new 27, whatever that means. Do you avoid political discussions with your family? I bet they don't like some of the things. No, I don't avoid them. Well, I'll have them. I don't want to argue. I mean, you don't. You have to understand when it's pointless, right? And so I know, like, on many topics, it's completely pointless to talk to, say, my parents, because I know what they think. Um, if you ask me, I think that they don't think too deeply about a lot of issues. There's some issues that they know more about than others for sure, but and they're not always as predictable as red team, blue team, but very often very close to that. And so other people, other family members will actually listen to me. I have cousins. My brother will listen to me. I have cousins who will listen to me, and that's where the fight is. That's where there's actually a point in having the discussion. Uh, so I don't see much. You're not going to change their mind. They're not going to go down that rabbit hole. You can't red pill people. It's very hard to red pill your family because they're like you're a little kid to them, and what do you know? They got 35 years on you, so they figure they know everything. Although I probably have read more books than they have, but it doesn't matter. So why strain the relationship when it's not going to go anywhere? That's true with your friends. That's true with everybody. Uh, every married man is praying the heterosexual way. What do you mean by that, Luke? Do you all have like secret homosexual tendencies? I saw a story of a guy who had a traumatic brain injury that claimed he was gay. Yeah, I saw that story too. It was a British guy who was a rugby player and he went into a coma for some reason. He had some kind of, I think he fell or he was in a coma for a while. And when he came out, he became a hairdresser and became gay. And so they were studying him to see what happened. I also heard speculation though that he had just always been gay, and that was just his kind of excuse. Oh, I hurt my head. Now I'm gay. Hornberger is greater than a mosh. Hmm. I really think people sell a mosh short, but that's not necessarily untrue. Hornberger is very, very, very good. So, yeah, he's probably better than Amash. I would probably agree with that. But I think a lot of people, for some reason, Dave Smith, because of Russiagate and Amash, really he seems very, very against Amash in an unfair way. Whenever he talks about it, and I saw him talk about it at Porkfest, I think there's something personal about it that I don't understand. And he goes, it's like everything else is wrong. Like he just discounts everything good Amash has done because he thinks he was wrong. And it's funny too because he voted to impeach Trump, which Smith thinks Trump should be impeached. He just doesn't like the reason why. But that there's a baby to be split there because you could say, okay, Trump should be impeached for Yemen, but that's not going to happen. So they are going to impeach him for this stupid Russiagate thing. Well, is it necessarily wrong to impeach him, do the right thing for the wrong reasons? Which is the worst you could say about Amash. And Amash actually made a very clear argument as to why he was voting for that because the definition of high crimes and misdemeanors is totally it's ambiguous. And so whatever Trump did, you could call it a high crime and misdemeanor. So I think that I don't know why that is that he's so up on his ass about it because I think that Amash is. I mean, I think he's as congressmen go, he's basically just as good as Ron Paul. I think. Um, I met a very religious, formerly gay guy here at university. He says he believed it was immoral to be gay and told me that after he embraced God and dated a female friend, and after about 5 months, claims he became sexually attracted to her. Uh, to the best of my ability, I'd say he believed that he was telling me. It's possible. Look, human mind is very plastic, and you can teach yourself to eat onions and to eat crappy food, and you can teach yourself to get off to anything, right? If you have like say you're not if there's a kink that you find gross, but you are kind of forced into it after a couple times, you will start to find it kinky. There's people who find getting raped kinky because they got raped. I've met a lot of guys who got raped and it becomes a kink, right? I have a lot of guys who got molested and now that's a kink, right? They got molested by their uncle or by their dad or by their older brother, and now that they're 25, they still want to get molested by an older guy. So if you can do that, you can become straight probably. But it, the we I don't think we understand the psyche well enough, sexual preference well enough to say, okay, these are the steps you follow, and then you can change your sexuality. It might be possible, but my guess is it's different for everybody how that can happen. So, yeah, it could happen, but I just think it's very unlikely. Amash is uber disappointing, but much better than Gary Johnson. I still understand why he's so disappointing. Um, People spell goyim that way to avoid censors. Okay, well in that case, I know what a goy is. Yes, of course. I'm a goy. We're all goys. We're all goys here. Um, Jeez. Well, we are chatty today. Um, God, I know. What's the deal? I'm not used to this many comments. Uh, in the UK, they pulled the black nurses and doctors off the corona front line because disparate impact, and now only white nurses and doctors. See, that just sounds racist to me. Um, did you hear about the CIA-backed American mercenaries that were caught by the Venezuelan government trying to overthrow the government? So I heard about that. I didn't read the story. Obviously, I wouldn't put it past the CIA to do that. I also wouldn't put it past the Venezuelans to claim that was happening. So I don't know. I'd have to look at the evidence. Um, but I haven't read anything about it, so I don't know. But what about white privilege? Yeah, it's like we can start having a debate about anything, and they'll just say, "But what about white privilege?" I'm like, okay, let's even just accept that white privilege is a thing. What does it have to do with COVID-19? What does it have to do with open carry? What does it have to do with tax policy? What does it have to do with abortion? What does it have to do with gay rights? What does it have to do with the war in Yemen or the war in Iraq? It's just like a way to derail any kind of discussion into some unknowable. It's almost like the equivalent of having any kind of policy debate, and then somebody going, "Yeah, but how do we know what's real? Maybe this is all a dream." Okay. Do you want to? But then they don't do it when they're making an argument for socialism. They don't end the discussion and go, "Yeah, but maybe we're all just brains in a vat." Oh, fuck. Uh, One of the guys who did the grievance studies on Twitter calling the alt-right Rothbardian because of the David Duke article. I called him out for being ahistorical. He just reposted the article to me. Yeah, there's this very strong guilt by association against libertarians that they don't use against liberals. So liberals can be like in the Klan. They can praise people in the Klan. They can even wear blackface. They can be the governor. I mean, the governor of Virginia either wore blackface or a Klan outfit. And you look at people like Senator Beard. Uh, Senator Byrd, he was in the Klan for 20 years, and Obama eulogized him, and the New York Times eulogized him, and blah blah blah. And Bill Clinton ran with the Confederate flag in his campaign material in the South, and Dixie for Clinton and all that stuff. So for some reason, there's no guilt by association there. That doesn't matter at all. But if Rand Paul gave Murray Rothbard a ride to the airport, and Murray Rothbard once said nice things about David Duke, then Ron Paul is a racist because his son gave a ride to a guy who gave an article about a guy who says he's racist. But then there's no amount of connection between it's just any degree of association. So wow, I feel like I'm the only uncut male born in New York State. Well, I'm sure that's not true, Adirondack guy. I'm sure there's more than that. That 1619 Slavery Project won the Pulitzer Prize. Are you surprised? The brainchild of the project claimed that the Revolutionary War was fought primarily to preserve slavery. And that is just so stupid. What was I listening to? They were breaking that down. I mean, they even put it in. It was one of the things that they criticized King George for, is that he introduced the slave trade. That they're blaming him. They're blaming the English for bringing slavery to America. That is a very strained attempt to just say slavery is everything. Slavery means like everything is slavery. Everything's tied to slavery. Just like the stupid economic arguments that like everything is tied to slavery. Yeah, that's why when the Civil War happened, the economy in the North collapsed because they didn't have slavery anymore. Oh wait, nope, that didn't happen. That's why after the Civil War ended, the economy in the United States collapsed and didn't grow at all because slavery was the magical linchpin that made it all run. Oh no, it grew faster without slavery. It's just false. Who would know? I mean, again, that whole shelf, that's the slavery shelf, people. But I don't need to read that. I can just read the 1619 Project, and that's all I need to know. Don't learn yourself. Don't think for yourself. Let the New York Times tell you what to think. Just watch CNN. You don't need to know anything about history. Aren't they? Aren't they considering adding it to high school curriculums? I've heard it's already been incorporated into some high school curriculums. And I hate. There's something about this idea that you give somebody this like historical revisionism, and they don't know any history and they don't know anything themselves, and so it sounds like they're getting this elite, rare knowledge that they are, and actually libertarians are really bad about this too, because libertarians learn about central banking, they learn about the Rothschilds, they learn about the creature from Jekyll Island, and suddenly they think they know it all, right? And they know more about it than most people do. That's the sad thing there. But um, you come and say, oh, everything you thought you know about American history is wrong. Here's the truth. The truth is that everything's about slavery. And then here's this article about it. And it brings up historical facts that you didn't know and that you find interesting. I found the same thing when I read The Half Will Never Be Known by Edward Baptiste. You could read that, and if you didn't know anything about slavery, you would be impressed by the scholarship. You would. You would think, wow, I just didn't understand. And then you would also, while you were eating this impressive historical knowledge, you would also be swallowing a hook. They're hooking you. And a more experienced fish knows not to bite. But most people are not experienced fish. It's a terrible metaphor. Sorry, it's just what came to mind. I secretly really like wearing the mask outside. Don't think I'm going to ever give it up. Yeah, it is a nice way to break up the social recognition software. You should check out Peter Hitchens' reports when he lived in the USSR. Good look on how brutal life was. Apparently, I should pick a. I've been watching a lot of Christopher Hitchens lately. I've never watched Peter, so. Peter Hitchens is the bizarro paleo-conservative Christopher Hitchens. Yeah, they're very different apparently, especially since one of them's still alive and one of them's dead. Do you recognize that third world immigration would greatly impact the circumcision culture in the United States? 99% of SA immigrants, SA, I don't know what that means, South African immigrants are against circumcision. Yes, it could, but there's also this tendency for immigrants to want to acculturate to the United States, and part of that is seen as getting circumcised because that's the American thing to do. So I think more wouldn't, but some still will. Plus, I'm a little biased as I'm a white man who grew up in the southern border and don't have a bias against immigrants like most other white Americans seems to do. Well, I think we know that like Latino immigration to places like California has been one of the main reasons the circumcision rate's so low there. But of course, the other reason is that it's not covered by Medicaid. Um, I feel like they assimilate to U.S. culture pretty quickly. Yeah, there's a danger, and a lot of them do get circumcised just to match them with Americans. The number one bestest philosopher of our time says you should sever all ties with your parents. Where did I go wrong? I haven't donated enough to him, so I haven't absorbed his teachings as well as I should. We're not gay, we're just gay for you. Oh, that's cute. They're not, though. Areas with large Hispanic populations have astronomically lower circumcision rates. You say that death and taxes, but I have more than once hooked up with Latino guys, even ones who were born in places like Guatemala or Chile or Peru or Mexico, and been disappointed to find out that they are cut. So it's not 100% there, but yeah, I think that in terms of trends, you are correct. That's a good defensive mosh. I don't even remember what I said. Um, okay. Every single stream has an anti-gamer hate speech. Why? I didn't give a speech. I just said go outside for Christ's sakes. And I've seen it. Like I have friends who were gamers and then they. So here's an example to that. My roommate was a gamer. Every day he worked, and then when he wasn't working, he was playing World of Warcraft. He didn't have sex for 2 or 3 years. He didn't date. He was out of shape. He didn't do anything. He was a smoker. He ate really crappy. He quit gaming. Like he set a date. He was going to finish. I think he played World of Warcraft. He finished whatever thing with his team. He went out. He lost a whole bunch of weight. He quit smoking. He joined jujitsu, he got a girlfriend, and now they're going to get married and they're going to have a kid. So there you go. But if World of Warcraft is that fun, I guess you would rather do that. Um, Immigration doesn't actually reduce the circumcision rate among the existing citizenry; it just dilutes them. Gregory, we don't. It's interesting because like if there are more uncut guys in the locker room, um, I think the odds of the cut guys changing their minds about circumcision go up. They won't all change their minds, and it may be a small number, but it becomes more acceptable. So I think it helps. But you are right. Because the immigrants are uncut doesn't mean that the natives are just going to switch. Yeah. Circumcision Choice also has an article calling me a domestic terrorist. I don't know who Circumcision Choice is. I'll have to look them up. Just started watching from the beginning. I initially thought Reed's accusations were more credible than Ford's, but now Reed's story is falling apart. Yeah, but the point is, Kennedy, that doesn't even matter because by the logic that the left uses, it doesn't matter if the story falls apart. It doesn't even matter if it's true. The accusation alone is enough to find someone guilty, at least in the court of public opinion. So I have no stake in whether the story is true or not. I think that he would do something like that, but we don't know if it happened in that case. And the fact that she told people at the time doesn't prove that it's true either, right? I could go out and just start saying somebody raped me, and that doesn't make it true. So yeah, that could very well be, but it also doesn't really matter because they've been arguing that it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. I know you don't use Facebook much, but did you hear about the Facebook establishing their own quote Supreme Court that will moderate what is and isn't on Facebook? Moderate what, I wonder? Mercs, they confess to exactly what Maduro would want them to say. Seems fishy, but also their operations sounded Bay of Pigsy. Yeah, see that I don't know anything, but I could see that going either way. So I don't really know. The CIA definitely does shit like that all the time, especially in Latin America. So fuck them for that. But also, communist dictatorships have a way of just blaming everything on the CIA and saying, "Oh, our healthcare system sucks because of wrecking." You know, so who knows? I don't know. Uh, Personally think that labeling sexual orientation is in itself brainwashing. I don't know if brainwashing is the right word. I mean, I've been brainwashed before and didn't feel like that. Um, Reed's mother's call to Larry doesn't sound consistent with Reed's story. Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not saying he did it. The point is that the accusation alone was enough to end Kavanaugh. It should be enough to end Biden. Holy shit, guys! I cannot keep up with these. Gonna have to start requesting super chats. Uh, Go and watch Amasha's last episode on Meet the Press. Yeah, yeah, and that's a fair point. If he's going to be a libertarian, he should spread libertarian ideals, which honestly he would be good at. He's articulate. He knows what he's talking about. He should be able to do that. Um, to say he is Ron Paul is so off. I'm sorry. I think in terms of his politics and his policies, I think that that's not off at all. Um, have you read Renegade History by Thaddeus Russell? No, I've listened to a lot of Thaddeus Russell, but I haven't read it. Um, I know you claimed you listened to his podcast. I do listen to his podcast. Not every episode, but quite a few of them. Tom Woods broke down the 2016-19 project. Yeah. All the wealth that American slavery created was wiped out in the Civil War. That's a good point. It would probably be something like that. And that doesn't even count like the hundreds of thousands of people who died. Who I saw a poster for that in college. 650,000 deaths, which by the way they've upped that to more like 850,000, who will pay reparations for these men? Yeah, it doesn't even matter. Like all this talk about reparations and the 650,000 Northerners who died do not matter at all. And slavery is really terrible. It's not. It is, but death is also really terrible. And 650,000 dead bodies that's a lot. Not to mention people who lost arms and legs and traumatized for life. Hmm. The British were a bit better on slavery, though. Lord Mansfield banned slavery, and look, they were a bit better later. They weren't so much better earlier. That's true that the abolitionist movement was a little bit ahead of schedule in England than it was in the United States. But that you even point out there in 1772. But when they're talking about the Declaration of Independence, they're going back farther in history. So everything you're saying there is true, but from the point of view of 1776, you wouldn't have really been able to say that. Uh, buh, 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 buh. Duh, 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 duh. You became popular at school because you were uncut. I don't know why that would make you popular. Um, Someone put a gun to your head and I would choose nationalism over communism easily. Did you check out the HBO series Chernobyl? Just finished it and thought it was way too heavy-handed in its message to be point of being propaganda. Those bad Russians lie, but don't we don't, right? Well, to be fair, they didn't make any claims about the West being honest. I liked Chernobyl. I have heard criticisms of some of the details and things like that, but I'm not going to carry water for the USSR. They were full of liars. They were the bureaucratic incentives. I think all that was very, very true. There's parts of it that they have amalgamated characters, so like that female physicist, she's an amalgamation and doesn't make a lot of sense because she's like an Ubermensch in that. Um, so I liked it. A lot of people think it also had a very strongly anti-nuclear power message that's maybe not fair. So the Russians certainly didn't like it. The Russians are making their own version where the CIA does it, which is new. They never claimed that until now. They also exaggerated the thermal event. They said it was going to be like a 60 megaton explosion, and that's not correct. Similar with the degree that it's like 3 Hiroshima bombs an hour or whatever. That wasn't correct either. Um, I'm not saying the U.S. founding fathers were not good on slavery from the time, most of them, but freeing slaves was a common war tactic. You don't have the dynamic on the Patriot side that much. Uh, well, to be fair, freeing slaves as a war tactic is what happened in the Civil War as well. Lincoln was very clear about not freeing slaves of anyone who was loyal to the Union, and only started doing it as a war measure, essentially, in fits and starts. Ooh, did I finally catch up? Thank God. Ugh, you guys are killing me tonight. It is interesting too to see how the left hates fossil fuels and they want renewable energy, but they hate nuclear. When nuclear is the, I mean, nuclear is the clear answer. It seems like it's by far the cleanest, and it's really by far the safest. And we have the technology already. We're being held back by the EPA, by the way. EPA regulations have prevented us from building any new nuclear reactors since 1977. I've actually been to the newest nuclear power plant in the state, I think, or the second newest in the United States, and it's called Comanche Peak in Glen Rose, Texas. I actually drilled an oil well there. Um, I've heard a lot of stories about thorium, but I'm not a nuclear physicist, so I don't know. The rumor I heard is that thorium isn't useful in weapons, so the government's not really interested. If slavery creates economic wealth, Brazil should be the richer than the U.S. Yeah, yeah. If black social issues are because of slavery, why are so many issues, single motherhood, getting worse? Yeah, and why? And again, all these people who bitch about slavery, it's like, so do you want Brazil to give up everything? Do you want Colombia to give up everything? Do you want Angola to give back all the money that they got paid? Right, like slave traders were going to the Angola and Benin and Togo and Cote d'Ivoire, and they're paying, local rulers for their slaves that they were capturing in war. So are all they guilty? It's completely selective. The only people who are guilty are white people, and especially Americans, and nobody else. Blacks who engage in slavery aren't guilty. Arabs who engage in slavery aren't guilty. Latin Americans who engaged in slavery in the North Atlantic slave trade, to a far greater degree, are Cubans. Cuba had slavery until almost 1890. Brazil had slavery until 1888, and they had many, many more slaves than we did. Doesn't matter. Doesn't even get brought up. When I brought that up to people, they don't even know what they're talking. They don't even know how to react. Are you still stacking silver? I still have stacks of silver. Uh, did you hear about Michael Moore's latest documentary? It criticizes the Green Movement as being hypocritical. Leftists want to be banned for showing them out. I also didn't he call out for like full communism though too? There is a good point about Lincoln. Also, Maryland, Delaware on the Union side were slaves. Well, Delaware was on the Union side. Maryland was a border state, as was Kentucky and Missouri. So all of those states had slavery. Maryland, I mean, Lincoln threw everyone in. Lincoln arrested all of the secessionist people in Congress and declared martial law, and then made Maryland. So calling Maryland on the Union side is a little bit of a stretch. But yes, there were slaves in the North. There were slave states, and he was very clear that you could keep your slaves if you remain loyal to the Union. And it was there were actually emancipation orders given in places like Missouri. John C. Fremont, powerful Republican, famous for fighting in California. He did an emancipation proclamation when he was the military governor of Missouri, and Lincoln countermanded it and said you can't do that. So it was a war measure. They did it as a war measure. There's actually uh, like some very big progressive people today who actually worry that it wasn't constitutional, that the entire legal basis of emancipation in the Civil War is questionable. Because so much about the Civil War is fought in the battlefield, not in the courtroom. And so it didn't really resolve a lot of legal issues that we kind of take for granted. Uh, what do you think about Ryan Dawson and his endless campaign against Zionism and Jay subversion of the government? I'm a big fan of Ryan Dawson. That's not the only thing he talks about. And he's actually very, very careful to say Zionist and not Jew. And I don't think he's a conspiracy theorist. I just think he's very well informed about the, AIPAC, and he knows the history pretty well. And he's never said anything about it that I thought wasn't correct. So, um, blame the slavery is never directed on the Africans who originally captured the slaves to be sold. Yes, because most people saw Roots and they think Roots is history instead of fiction. Roots is fiction. You did not have white people landing on a boat and going into the jungle and snatching up Africans. That probably did happen. There's some evidence the Portuguese did that a little bit, but it would have been probably less than a single percentage point. Everybody else were Africans going to war against other Africans, taking slaves in war, which is historically how it always happens. And then they would use the captives themselves, but then they would take their surplus and they would sell them to Europeans, for cloth, for guns, for iron, for nails, for that sort of thing. So they were paid. They were paid. They profited by selling, their brethren, their fellow people of color, and that seems to not matter at all. Like, I've brought this up to people, and they just like, nope, I am ignoring that point. I have a narrative, and I am omitting contrary evidence. End of story. Omitted about Brazil, omitted about Cuba, omitted about Mexico, omitted about all of, like, they had slavery in all of Latin America, of Native Americans and of blacks, all, like, everywhere. Nobody, is anyone mad about Bolivia? Do you know how the Spanish treated the Native Americans in Bolivia, in the Rich Hill, in the silver mines? You know what that was like? Like, nope, don't care. And how many? I mean, it's something like, I think it's 91% of the Africans did not go to the United States. They went to someplace else in the New World, to Latin America. Uh, what's with the nuclear power discussion? Britain gave India a pass on slavery in 1837. Yeah, they also delayed it in their colonies. So, like in Jamaica and some of their other colonies, they allowed it to continue much longer because they had a financial incentive. But they didn't have lots of slaves in England. The United States did. It was totally different. It was a totally logistically different ballgame. I think I'm about 15% more loyalist than you. Okay. Do you think investing in oil is a good idea right now? Well, now might be your chance. Buy low, sell high. I did not know about Missouri. Fascinating. Yeah, that's a very well-known account, I think. John C. Fremont basically issued an Emancipation Proclamation. He was a powerful Republican. I mean, he'd been the Republican nominee for president in 1856. So before Lincoln was, and Lincoln remanded the orders. He said, you can't do that. There will be no emancipation. So, and the first, you have people like General Butler, who was a political general. Like, he was a Democrat, but he was from the North, and he supported the North. He was against secession, so he had no military career experience, but he became a general. And at some point, I think during the Peninsula Campaign in Virginia, some slaves ran away, and they came to the Union Army. And the masters showed up at the Union Army and said, "Hey, my slaves ran away. Give them back. They're my property. I have a right to them under the Fugitive Slave Law." And Butler called them, quote, contraband of war. He said that they're contraband of war, that you're in rebellion, so your property's forfeit, you don't get your slaves back. And this actually, there was a big debate about this, because there were a lot of people in the North that said, no, fugitive slave law is still the law of the federal government, right? The federal government's still bound by this. So actually, the term was invented. So a lot of times, blacks who ran away to the Union lines were called contraband. And there's actually an ongoing debate whether that was ever legal to do that. So that was kind of the modus operandi up until the Emancipation Proclamation, which again was a proclamation made in war that was, and again, the war is interesting because it wasn't a declared war. It was an insurrection. There's a lot of weird things about the Civil War that are kind of glossed over by the fact that there were just battles fought. I'm going to go make a pizza. Have a good time. I actually ate a pizza earlier today. Is DiLorenzo's book on Lincoln good history? So I have the real Lincoln. I haven't read it. I've watched quite a few videos of DiLorenzo talking about it, and as far as I know, it's all accurate. It just might be, some of the emphasis might be questionable. I did see an interesting C-SPAN 3, where they interviewed James McPherson, who's probably one of the most, if not the most famous conventional Civil War historians. In his book, he has a 2-volume history of the Civil War called Battle Cry of Freedom, which I recommend. It's a great book. But he's also a New Deal Democrat, and that colors his view of history in a way that's pretty explicit in some parts. And during the interview, they took calls, and somebody called and basically said, well, there's this author named Tom DeLorenzo, and he says that Lincoln, didn't want to free the slaves. And he lists all these things that Lincoln did and said about slavery. And what was interesting is McPherson replied, he goes, all that's true, but you have to understand that Tom DeLorenzo is a libertarian, and he comes at everything from a libertarian perspective. So it was interesting. He basically admitted everything that was being claimed was correct, but because DeLorenzo was a libertarian, it could be dismissed out of hand. So it's like, how are you not, you're not even engaging with the argument. You're just saying he's libertarian, so it's not right. But nothing that he said was wrong, right? If you listen to Lincoln's first inaugural, he says very explicitly, if he can keep the Union together by not freeing a single slave, then that's what he'll do. If he can do it by freeing all the slaves, then that's what he'll do. If he can free some slaves and not others, then he'll do that. He's very, very explicit. He's a nationalist first. He wants to preserve the Union, which we don't call it a Union anymore because the Civil War destroyed the Union, right? The North won, the Union lost. There was no Union after the Civil War. It became a Union of the Sword, the title of a book on that topic, which is a great book, by the way, The Union of the Sword. It's not a voluntary association of free states at that point. It is an empire. The American Empire was born in 1861 when Lincoln invaded the South. And he didn't do it to free the slaves. Now, Lincoln did not like slavery. He did think it was evil. But one of the main things he hated about it was that it caused acrimony within the United States. He thought it was evil for other reasons as well, but he was not willing to end it. He was willing to preserve it. Now, there was going to be a battle about extending it into the territories or whatever. It was likely that with a Lincoln presidency, a Republican president would have appointed Republicans to positions throughout the South, like postmaster generalship. So a lot of people were pretty sure that a Republican president would lead to the birth of a Republican Party in the South. Southerners were very, very worried, and I'll have to do a review of this. There's a famous book. A former slave abolitionist from North Carolina wrote a book. Oh, I'm going to not remember the name. The Problem with the South or something like that, where basically he said, look, slavery's for rich whites. Poor whites get fucked by that system, and poor whites are not being represented by their leaders. And this book was banned in the South, and several people were actually hanged for distributing this book. Republicans created a miniaturized version of the book that they printed 60,000 copies of and gave them all out before the election. So a lot of people thought that Lincoln would appoint a whole bunch of Republicans and that a Republican Party would grow up in the South and challenge Democratic hegemony, and that you would have anti-slavery parties in the South thanks to a Republican president. So there's a lot of evidence that that's one of the reasons that they left. COVID is interfering with my tourism to Pattaya, Thailand. What we forget is that most nations around the 1800s were involved in the slave trade, including Africans through the Muslim nations. It wasn't just the Muslims, though. The Africans were doing it too, right? Sub-Saharan Africans were slave traders. They were catching them, they were selling them, they were enslaving them, just like everybody else. Having worked in the nuclear industry, I didn't find Chernobyl anti-nuclear, I found it anti-Soviet. Ryan Dawson has denied the Holocaust on Twitter. I'd have to see the tweet. If he did, oh well, people disagree about it. It's a historical event. People can disagree about it. I like how quickly this conversation got off boring Biden. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just needed a topic for the title. No, he didn't deny the Holocaust. Ryan Dawson just thinks the official numbers are a few million less. Death in Texas, that is by definition Holocaust denial, because if you think that the number of Jews is anything different than 6 million, that's Holocaust denial. I have a very liberal friend who recently read For New Liberty and found it very compelling. What do you think I should recommend as his next couple libertarian books? Thanks. Oh, well, that's wonderful to hear. And For New Liberty is a compelling book. So I always recommend The Problem with Political Authority. Again, The Problem of Political Authority by Michael Huemer. Michael Huemer. I think it's Huemer. That would always be my number one. That would be my number one, and For New Liberty would probably be my number two. So I haven't read that. And then after that, check out Libertarianism Today by Jacob Hubert. That would also be a really good one. And they're very readable, accessible. And then after that, maybe Machinery of Freedom by David Friedman. Holy God, guys, you were just all over the place. Anti-narrative is an anti. Yeah, we're having a Holocaust denial. Guys, the only video I've had that was taken down was called Holocaust Denial. Okay, Cozy. He says he could take or leave pizza. You are banned from my channel. Um, how did you get popular at school? I'm wondering that too, Gregory. Why did being uncut make him popular at school? Um, Gregory Mielchuk, do you plan on doing any debates again? I liked your debate with iHypocrite. When did you debate iHypocrite? I got in a debate with iHypocrite in the comments, and he's very hypocritical, and it's kind of revolting, actually. He's hard to listen to. How's your Icelandic coming along? Planning on learning any other languages? It's not coming along very well. I lost motivation. I'll have to gain it back. But I'm refusing to learn any other languages until I learn Icelandic because I don't want to be in the habit of doing it a little bit and then stopping. But yes, I would like to do other languages after Icelandic, but I don't know which. I was heavily thinking about Latin or ancient Greek, but we'll see. One friend saw my manhood and word spread among the guys, and many wanted to see it. That's all. Adirondack guy, how old are you, if I may ask? 5,999,999 is denial. Yeah, it's crazy, but it's true. It's exactly 6 million. Like you can't like the number couldn't be. Yeah, you're 6 million and two tour. Ryan Dawson is ridiculous. Just look at his Twitter. Not on Twitter. I've never seen his Twitter. I've only seen his YouTube channel, and I've always thought it was pretty fair. I like watching him. There's a video of Corwin, Polish politician in the European Parliament, saying no more than 5,999,999 to just. Do you have an OnlyFans? No. You're learning Icelandic, supposedly off and on. Sometimes very studiously, sometimes not. I have that problem with languages, books, all sorts of things. Fun to start, but no discipline to finish. This is gamer brain. Well, I finished books, so I don't have that problem. Uh, In having his inaugural address, Lincoln endorsed the Corwin Amendment to the Constitution, which would have constitutionally protected slavery going forward. Yeah, he would have done almost anything to stop secession, including shred up the Constitution, raise an army, and abolish habeas corpus, declare martial law, start a draft eventually, right? Uh, stop, destroy the currency, issue greenbacks. He was a nationalist, and he wanted to end secession. He did not like slavery either, but I think one of the main reasons he didn't like it is because it was a wedge issue that was literally tearing the country apart. Uh, Learn Esperanto? No, I'm not going to learn Esperanto. Only real way to learn Icelandic is immersion with native speakers, which, short of moving to Reykjavik, is improbable for Icelandic. Griffin, the problem there is that when you walk around the streets in Reykjavik, except for maybe now, but normally, you hear more English than you hear Icelandic. They all speak English. Although I think you're wrong. I have Icelandic friends. I can talk to them. Like, you can still learn it. Yeah, I'm just curious when you were in high school, Adirondack guy. Like, what time period was it so cool to be uncut in New York? Uh, let's see. So what? The Biden podcast became about nuclear power, the Holocaust, and circumcision. Thai is a pretty easy language to learn. I fear the writing system for Thai is really terrible, though. Like it's very hard to learn. What else is new? Mm, any C1 progress? Well, I'm at C5, so yes. Um, Stephen, that just takes forever. I am making progress, but it's very slow. Again, I've confused somebody recently. I sent someone pictures, and they're like, "Oh, I love uncut dick." It's like, if only. In his inaugural address, Lincoln endorsed the Corwin Amendment passed earlier that day, which would have constitutionally protected slavery. Yeah, this idea that he was an abolitionist is a disservice to people who were actually abolitionists. Thai is pretty tough if your native language doesn't have tones, like in Mandarin. Tortoise, what's your native language again? Is it Cantonese and Polish? All right, guys, it's getting kind of late. I'm getting kind of tired, so let's do last call on questions here. 1990, small mountain school, not many in my class, around 20 kids. Well, if there's 20 kids and you were the only one, and half of them are boys, that means 10% of the guys at your school were uncut. Think about that. I always considered myself a low status male until I started living in Thailand almost full time. Western women are insane and have insanely high standards. Is dating easier for its gay men? Yeah, so I actually know people who've been to Thailand and they say the same thing. If you're like 2 or a 3 in the States, or like a 8 or a 9 in Thailand. Um, Relatively lucky. Only cut at C4 up to C7 plus since seeing your first restoration video. How long did that take? A couple years? I only speak English and French. Learning Polish. Get back to your roots. Thanks, ANCAP217. Have a good night. Thanks for watching. Even if we don't agree on Justin Amash, it's good to hear from you. Thanks for doing the stream. Thanks, Charles. Congratulations on your uncut child. Yeah, the abolition washing of the Lincoln presidency is kind of revolting. You could say that what he was doing was pragmatic for the time and fair, but he has been canonized in a way that's really gratuitous. Year and a half. God damn, you are making excellent progress. Are you tugging like all day, all night? Or are you doing like 2 hours here, 2 hours there? And what method are you doing? Are you doing DTR, TLC, T-tape, manual? Also, are you noticing any changes in terms of sensation? I recall him claiming Mossad blew up the towers. Okay. Did you see the Lincoln film with Daniel Day-Lewis? I did. And I liked it and I hated it. There's a lot in there that's just so outlandishly stupid. The very first scene where he's in the rain and like these white soldiers come up to him and they're just totally bumfuck idiots and totally ignorant. And then this black soldier comes up and is super articulate and super well informed and just speaks to him with absolutely no fear. And I was like, there's just, what the fuck is this? And then uh, there's something else that really pissed me off about that movie. It wasn't bad. Like, they didn't lie. Like, it wasn't full of lies. Um, oh, well, like the way he treated black people was whitewashed, right? He didn't treat them that well. The only one that he ever called by his name was Frederick Douglass. Everyone else was he called black women uh, auntie, and he called black men boys. Um, and yeah, GGWP, whatever that stands. And good night. Thanks, stream. All right. Good night, E. Have a good night, my gay brethren. Good night, Death and Taxes. There's also in the Lincoln movie, the Southerners raise all these points about tyranny, and they're just kind of glossed over, like, oh, it doesn't really matter. He means well, so he gets a free pass there. He's just a conspiracy huckster. Yeah, but he's not selling tangy tangerine, and like he suffers. He's constantly getting all of his work erased. So I think it's a passion project for him. He could do other things. If he just wanted to make money, he's doing a terrible job because he's not producing on, like, he's trying to get a message out and it's getting chopped down. And all his efforts gets erased, and he's too stupid. He's not so stupid that he would do that if he was just trying to make money. Manual plus O-ring method, huge increase, no more discomfort during the day. Color and texture of the glands changed, and it produced a bit more moisture now. Hey, there you go. Huge increase, no more discomfort during the day. Color, that's interesting. It sounds like, when you do O-rings, do you do O-rings like all the time? Like you just keep it basically retained, or just some of the time? I made an OnlyFans for my cat. Hey, how was the pizza? Did you make it yet? I like Ryan Dawson, and I respect him. I don't agree with everything. I'm an anarchist, and he's not, for instance, but scar line is way more sensitive now. Interesting. Now, is the scar line rolled over to where it's at the bottom, or is it still up the shaft? Guess I shouldn't presume where it was. Alex Jones's rant about eating his neighbors is the most hilarious thing I've ever did see. I never saw that. Retaining, including overnight, with the O-rings. I try to keep them on as much as I can, but blah, blah, blah. Okay. Well, that's good. I'm glad. C7's good. It's at the tip where the front of our band is. Okay, as you continue to grow, it's going to roll under and be on the inner skin, so you won't even be able to see it. So that's good. Thank you for your time and kind attention. Thank you for not circumcising your son. Be very careful when you go to the hospital, though. Can you give me advice on how to find a good long-term partner? Asking the wrong guy. No. There are about 100 different 9/11 theories. Why would I try and refute every one of them? Mike, to be fair, Ryan Dawson doesn't advocate all 100 9/11 theories. He has one theory. So if you want to say that he's full of shit, you don't have to refute, all of the theories. You have to refute the one that Ryan Dawson has. So, and I'll be honest, I don't know exactly what his theory is. So I don't think that's a fair criticism on your part. How much of Alex Jones's material do you think is legit, even if his delivery is crazy? I think that it's at least 50-50. Um, Look, he's a fearmonger. He's sensationalizing. He's always preaching doom and selling his goods or whatever. But there's usually at least a grain of truth there. And his political instincts, I think, are pretty good. And people say he's and he is over the top a lot of the time, but a lot of times he's very sanguine and realistic. When he says that you should be prepared for something bad to happen, and then something like this happens, yeah, he shows that that was probably wise. But I was a member of Prison Planet for probably 4 or 5 years in college. Also, much better erection quality and more pre-cum. Yeah, that sounds about right. Well, Jesus, why did it take me to get you to start doing it? All right, we got 1 minute, 1 hour, 58 minutes, so 2 minutes to go, people. What makes the erection quality better? Did you ever take anything Alex Jones said seriously? Yeah, some of the stuff. Since YouTube took Alex Jones down, I have not watched many of his videos. I haven't seen that much of them. Alex Jones on Joe Rogan is one of the most entertaining things I've ever seen. Agree there, and I think it's Rogan's highest rated podcast as well. I listened to ANCAP stuff going back to 2012, and then saw your videos on Foreskin. Oh, there we go. I somewhat took him seriously back in 2008 when I was in college. Yeah, that's when I started subscribing to Prison Planet, probably 2000 and 2006, 2007, and probably until around 2010, 2011. Much thicker, no ED problems. There you go. Now, if you don't retain at all, and you're not stretching, you have like a C7. So your head should be mostly covered all the time, other than like in a hot shower or something. It's just lucky your doctor started you at C4. I call Lincoln America's secular saint. His adoration might be, well, religious. Yes, I think that's fair. It's the patron saint of the federal government. I see more Paul Joseph Watson. Well, he's still on YouTube, so I actually see a lot more Paul Joseph Watson as well. My glands aren't exposed walking around. Well, that makes, I think that makes, Steven, I think that's like, and I haven't gotten to that point yet. I feel like that's like the main turning point where you have a functionally different, penis at that point. If you have consistent coverage walking around, you can still get more because having coverage when you're hard is great too. But like having coverage when you're soft makes a huge difference. So congratulations. There's a temple to him. It makes sense. Yeah, there's a very Greek-looking temple, Roman temple of him. Alex Scott Horton says that the way people talk about the federal government, it sounds like they think that that statue of Lincoln's running the show. That we have this super authoritarian, super competent, super wise, super benevolent deity in Washington that's pulling the strings. And no, that's just a statue and it's a myth. And whatever Lincoln's virtues and merits, and certainly there were some, he was a very flawed man and did many horrible, terrible things. Uh, from what, and not just from a libertarian perspective, the way he prosecuted the war was highly questionable. The fact that he fought the war at all raises a whole series of important questions that people are just not asking. Suspending habeas corpus, imprisoning his political enemies, exiling his political enemies, having Native Americans executed in mass. Right, he's still the president who had the largest mass execution ever of the Tetons or the Sioux and the Minnesota uprising. So you know, he's not a saint. He's not perfect. He did a lot of bad things. There are a lot of questionable assumptions there, and it's just completely canonized. So, which makes me all the more revolting. If there was like an honest view of what he talked about, I wouldn't feel as strongly as I do. But because he gets lionized, it's the same. It's the same with FDR, who I think FDR is the worst president, but they're just lionized as these like idealized perfect beings that we need to emulate when that's about as far from the truth as you can get. So, all right, guys, I am about to fall asleep, but I want to thank everybody for watching and for the lively chat. I think that was the most lively chat that I've seen yet. So, I guess that's good. So, anyway, thanks all and have a good evening. I'll talk to you later.